good sport. Estella is going to be speaking with us about the EPA non-point source funding, and you all have kind of been introduced to Greg Peterson with the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. He's going to speak to his experience working with the non-point source program, and you see the connections that agriculture needs to be and is connected to all that we do that relates to water. So with that, I'm going to hand over a microphone, and I think we have, Greg, we have a PowerPoint up for you. Estella, are you good? Okay, very good. All right. So both microphones are now working, which will probably help. And if possible, this is probably a better spot to be heard.
Yeah.
But I don't want you to get blinded.
All right. Well, I guess maybe I'll start off here. I don't want to take too much time because our program would not exist if it wasn't for the project sponsors, as well as the EPA. So I do want to spend some time for Greg to be able to talk about what it's like from the project sponsor perspective. But I have a couple of notes just based off of a couple of folks that went before us. So I wanted to kind of put some connections here on some of the other grant options that came in and how it might tie into our program. So we're the non-point source program. We're through the Water Quality Control Division, and our big emphasis is water quality. And so that non-point source pollution type of connection. Our main source of funding is through the Section 319 Federal Clean Water Act, so we get that grant through EPA. We do have other sources of funding that we use through Power Authority as well as Water Quality Improvement Funds. But our main source of funding is Section 319. So that's the type of funding requirements that I'm going to be mainly talking about here today. If you do want some more information, a little plug here, I'm doing a presentation tomorrow morning on the update to the non-point source management plan. And the management plan kind of talks about all the different priorities that we have, how we got to those priorities, and then it kind of sets out how those priorities are going to be met through different strategies for the next 5 years. And so the main emphasis for the non-point source program is load reductions in those non-point source pollutants. So this is kind of like the big shift here on some of these programs that have already been met here. So when you talked about like the monitoring piece at the end, the monitoring, that's kind of like a nice little segue to what the non-point source program is about. So we have a requirement where you have to have a watershed plan in place. So it's called a 9-element watershed plan. Some of you may have heard about this. The PL 566 as well as the CWCB's watershed plans, those can be a nice fit. Usually what might be missing from those types of watershed plans is that emphasis again on the load reductions. We do also have a waiver for the requirement for a 9-element watershed plan for post-wildfire types of projects. So just kind of keep that in mind of sort of the whole idea is like you're having that planning so that you're prioritizing what kind of projects need to be done in that watershed to address those water quality issues that might be brought up by stakeholders. And then again, the big emphasis is the implementation after the plan. The 319 grant is a 5-year grant. We're about to announce what's called a request for applications. So October 21st, we'll post that request for applications onto our website. Folks will, look at that. If you want to talk with us, we have a table at the top of the stairs here. But once that application is out, then it's a competitive process. And again, the priorities are mentioned in the non-point source management plan, and a couple of priorities I just wanted to mention here. We have that post-disaster priority. We have national priority pollutants, so nutrients and sediment. We have an education outreach component that's required as part of your project. Stakeholder involvement is also required as well. And then we do have what's called a disproportionately impacted community priorities. So we have the state has this new tool called EnviroScreen. And this tool is used to then identify whether your project is within a census block that meets the Environmental Justice Act determination for a disadvantaged community. And you'll receive priority points under this RFA that's going to be released here in a couple of weeks. Let's see here. any kind of technical assistance, so we can help with sampling analysis plans. So again, sort of some more of that planning kind of piece that needs to be put in place to be able to just make sure that the monitoring is meeting different kinds of requirements to again, go back to see whether or not the best management practices that you're implementing are effective at addressing water quality. A couple of the grant programs that were mentioned, the RCPP and the SIG grants, we actually have a couple of projects that are receiving funding through RCPP and SIG, and so those are a nice fit for some of these larger types of projects that you need to kind of figure out how to mix some of these different kinds of federal fundings. We usually have a 40% match requirement that is non-federal. This year for the RFA, we're actually decreasing that down to 25%. So we're utilizing what are called water quality improvement funds to help meet that match requirement at the grant scale. Let's see, what else? EQIP funds are also a good fit for that federal, to again, expand your project scope here. CWCB funds are a great way to find that state fund, that non-federal match requirement. And then, let me just go through my last little bit here. We also have the education and outreach program that's called our mini grant program. So if you're looking for smaller types of projects, so 5K or under, so any kind of education outreach related to water quality. So this is really great for some of smaller groups that are putting on a conference, bike tours, anything like that. We've done river recreation guides, those types of outreach materials. And then Greg is going to go into edge of field studies, which is another big emphasis, as well as some of the modeling changes that we've had in our non-point source management plan. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Get started here. I'm Greg Peterson. I'm the executive director of the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. We're an association of about 15 ag organizations throughout the state, and our goal is to focus on supporting and preserving irrigated agriculture. And so just wanted to touch a bit about this program, our experiences, why we're doing it, and the project that we have. So who here thinks that we need more data on agricultural impacts on water quality? You can be honest. I know Robert's afraid to, and so I am genuinely raising my hand here, maybe for a different reason than some of you, and partly because I don't think I think our perspective going into this is that, boy, we're not as bad as people think, and we've got a really good story to tell, and that's why we're doing this project. And I think that's why we've been taking a much more active role in water quality the past 10, 15 years throughout the state. So this is a bit of a unique partnership. I'm sure you're all aware that the agricultural community and the regulation community aren't always the best of friends, right? That isn't new. Okay, and it can be tough. I mean, and like CDPHE is a very large entity. I mean, there are things that CDPHE will enforce that we aren't a fan of. I mean, there's some programs that work really well. The confined animal feed operation is one that's worked quite well, and it's a tough give and take. And I was talking about this to a group of students a couple weeks ago, how normally I don't think we would do this project, but really because of Estelle and Kanan, if they weren't there, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing this at all. And I mean, the past few years I've got to know them. It's kind of like dating. We get a feeling for each other. Now we're in this 3-year committed relationship, and honestly, I wouldn't do this project if they weren't at CDPHE. It really, and I needed that trust, because this project, for us, it isn't, oh, we get money. There's an element of risk that I think a lot of people don't have to think about when you're getting money for grant projects that we do, and I had to really think about. I mean, I went out, I was asking landowners to take their 50, 100-year-old farm and home and say, let's monitor the runoff on your farm. And they're like, really? Why are we doing this? I thought you were on our side, Greg. And so that was, I had to feel comfortable enough that I'm leading them in a direction that they're not going to lose their livelihoods, and to make sure that we can get through this process. So it's a bit of a unique partnership, and I just wanted to get into this, is that these risks, I mean, what risks are they taking? And I mean, there is this general the fear that regulation or the state will shut them down. And it doesn't happen a lot, but it happens enough that it's out there. And the world is not against agriculture, but it feels like that. There's enough people out there, and it's a small group that are, and sometimes they're in very high positions of authority. And that definitely makes it feel like the world is closing in on us. And it's stuff that's totally even out of your control. I mean, who here heard about the wolf attack last week in Rio Blanco County? Yeah, 18 calves in 90 minutes killed. And I mean, that's news that most ag producers are aware of. And it's just, even though wolves, water quality, that's still part of this feeling that, okay, do we really want to monitor what's happening on our, coming off of our fields? So I was about, 2 years ago when we were starting to put this project together, I had to really use my goodwill that I built up with landowners to ask them, do you want to participate in this study that we're doing? And so we started this year, and we're going to be going through 2024, so just 3 years. We have 4 landowners, all on the western slope, and we are doing these edge-of-field monitoring units, and we're monitoring nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and examining practices related to fertilizer application that improve the field and better manage nutrients. There's a couple reasons. What's interesting is all of these are irrigated meadow or cow-calf operations. There is, when it comes to research on irrigated meadows, there is almost nothing. When it comes to water quality in irrigated meadows, there's even less. This is just a weird black hole of information out there. There's one study that I found in the Rockies that dealt with nutrients and fertilizer on these. That was done in the Gunnison. And then there's one study done in Grand County just on how grasses respond to fertilizer. And that's it. And fertilizer practices on these operations are all over the place. Where you can go and find, in a row crop, you can go and find tons of information on when and how to apply fertilizer. They have that down to a science. I mean, and it is incredibly, what they have done in the years in a row cropping world in the past 30 years is dramatically different than what they used to do. And so why are we doing this? We're doing this for a couple reasons. Who here is familiar with Reg 85, Regulation 85? So in 2012, state passed Reg 85, non-point sources of pollution like us in the ag community. We have this 10-year period where we're encouraged to do best management practices and regulate and manage ourselves. 2012 plus 10, 2022, that's coming up pretty quickly. We're going to have the hearing this month. It's October. And even if this hearing goes well, likely every 3-5 years, we're going to have to continue making this case to the state and the people of Colorado that we can manage this issue and we don't need to be regulated. But how do we tell that story? And in the ag community, we talk about, okay, how much we've changed irrigation practices, how much we've changed fertilizer practices, and we know these things. We just don't have the data to back it up. And that's the language that we have to speak in. And I've spent really the past 2-3 years meeting with stock growers, ditch companies, sitting in people's barns, houses, just talking about that this is an issue that we have to be actively involved with any way we can, or we're going to get steamrolled. And so this is why and when it comes to these kinds of operations, these are so significantly less input than row crops. But nonetheless, I mean, a few years ago in the White River, you have algae issues, and the main group that gets blamed are the ranchers and their fertilizer practices. The final study of that report is coming out really soon, and that's not the case. I mean, they are one of about 12 causes of this, and the main cause is just low flows and warm temperatures of what's causing that algae. But it's just, okay, we need to go out and find this data to demonstrate what we are and what we aren't doing. And that was the big impetus for this. And so what we're doing is we've got these edge of field monitoring units on these 4 different properties. And this is how they all look, is you have a flume, you have the sampler, and it's continuously taking readings throughout the irrigation season. And so far, I mean, just to take a step back with the program, I've really only had, even though my funders are here, I've only had like 2 problems with the program. One is the Excel spreadsheets for the budgets do not work that well, and you have to go through and correct the equations. So that was, and then the one that was my mistake is, who here has done a sample analysis plan? Okay, I thought I could do this. I wrote our sample analysis plan, and by wrote, I mean I took a lot of information that CSU told me to put in there. I still don't understand it. I have like 2 degrees, and I don't understand it. And that's where, if you ever, you need to do a sample analysis plan, get the extra money and pay someone else to do it who knows what they're doing. That is the one mistake that I made, and that was a little bit of brain trauma for me. But so besides that, I mean, I've heard people said it's a lot of paperwork, not as much as I expected so far. It's actually been, and I mean, I continually turn in every invoice and every report in incorrectly, and Krista Trendle's really patient with me, and it's like, oh, here, I made these changes, and so, I mean, I'm probably a problem for you all, but so far it's been great for me. But the sample analysis plan is one that if you haven't done that before, you need to find someone who has and pay them to do it. That was a big hurdle for us. And so with these projects, I mean, ourselves, when I went out and did this, all I'm doing is digging holes with a shovel. We're working with CSU and their ag water quality team, Eric Wardle, and Manny DeLeon, and they've been amazing to work with. They're doing all the science. I don't have the ability, we don't have the capacity to do this. They're a subcontractor under us, and they have been a great partner, and we talk pretty often. This is the site in Mesa County. This is the site in Gunnison County. That's Manny. We're setting up that monitoring station there. And we were just out a few weeks ago at the sites again, pulling the equipment that can't be out there during the winter. And then right now, they're crunching all the data from the first year. In probably a month or 2, we're going to meet with each of the landowners to go over the data. What does this mean? Then we're going to meet with my board this winter to go over, here's all the data. What does this mean? Already talking with some of the landowners about, okay, what are we going to do for next year? Our one in Routt County off the Yampa, I mean, we're going to put in piezometers throughout the field, just because this is where I think we get to the place that is a really good spot, is there's a lot that we have that we can really learn from this that we want to know. I mean, nitrogen is expensive, and every bit of that you lose on the field is lost money, and you want that to be absorbed as much by the crop as possible. And these landowners, we're having this opportunity where we can play around and really see how are we irrigating these fields. And 2 of these are flood irrigated. One is a side roll. And how can we irrigate these fields to make sure to keep as much of that fertilizer on the field as possible? So that way they're getting as much forage as possible. And so we're looking at what other monitoring can we do throughout the fields, and how they do flood irrigation to try to do that. And I think we're going to get some really good, we're already getting some pretty interesting data from the first year of just what practices they can do to really just manage that nutrients, but also help them and their ranch be better. So this is the one in the Yampa. When we started installing it, irrigation had already started, and it was just a muddy mess. But that site, and here's this is the same site just from a drone shot, and this gives you a really good idea of just this field. It's pretty enormous irrigated pasture, and just that's a ditch that runs there, but that's just that main that collects through there, and that's where we're setting that up. So one part that made this project work really well, and we had to ask CDPHE to be a bit flexible with us, is discretion for the landowners involved. So we asked, if we do this, we can't tell you who the landowners are, we can't give you addresses, we can't give you coordinates, and they were okay with that. And otherwise, they wouldn't have participated at all. And again, it's just that worry of something, of whether a state agency or just anybody in general, and I think that it is a genuine fear. I mean, I was talking about this program earlier this summer, this project, and gentleman I work with, Nathan Coombs, who's a rancher down in the Conejos. Nathan and I work well together, but he's like, Greg, I like you, but I would never let you do this on my property at all. And I totally understand. And so we've been really fortunate with that. And what's been interesting is, I mean, we have funding, and is that maybe after a few years of data, we're going to be doing hopefully tour visits. And already a few of them have actually been quite verbal about that they're involved in this. One of them, he's at a couple of county meetings, he's mentioning that he's doing this. Another one, he was at a roundtable for Waters of the U.S. and decided that he was mentioning this. And so I'd like to think that we're affording these people the protection and just the confidence that this is something that we can look around, and maybe there are things that we can do better in terms of managing their nutrients, but there are things that they can also do better in terms of growing good forage without having any kind of negative consequences. And I think that ideally, that's where we want to be in the long run. And by the end of this project, I imagine all of them, it'll be quite public who they are and what projects we're working on. And it would be great to get people out and visiting these. And already, I mean, we've had interest from other landowners who want to do similar work. The only hitch I guess the other is just you need to have that 9-element watershed plan. And in areas where that isn't, that's a bit difficult. We can't really work around that. But already I've had other landowners who are interested and want to take us up on this. And that gets into we are currently working on another application. And Robert, this will be in our board meeting in 2 weeks. I'll be asking you all for permission. Those of you not familiar, they're doing TMDLs now on the lower Colorado River right before you get to the state line. And we've worked with Grand Valley water users for quite some time on a number of projects. And again, this is an issue of we are concerned that the data is not there. And in general, there is limited data of what is coming off of edge of fields on agricultural operations. Up until a few years ago, about 5 years ago, there wasn't a single study in Colorado on these edge of field studies. CSU has been doing almost all of them. And so what we're going to be working on, and right now putting together with Grand Valley water users, is probably maybe as many or 5 or 6 different landowners in hopefully each of these different watersheds, and very different operations. I mean, these are all flood irrigated, furrow irrigation, row crops. And what are we doing that's working well? What are we doing that isn't working well? How can we better manage our inputs? I mean, you've got people out there doing conservation tillage on furrow irrigation. Not an easy thing to do. Joe Bernal, some of you, he's working on that right now. And this is where, I mean, I'm a baby farmer. I've got 4 years now, and one thing that I'm learning that's so true is you get one shot a year to do something, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, that you're stuck with that the rest of the year, and you can't fix it until next year. And so it's every year. It's especially with some of these practices like conservation tillage on furrow irrigated grounds, or even just conservation in general. You get one shot a year. And if you screw it up, sometimes you can fix it, but usually it's like, well, that's what it is for the year. Okay, let's try again next year. And we've got other people working with nitrogen stabilizers, slow-release nitrogen. Again, we don't have data on any of this. We don't know what that does in terms of impacts, good or bad. And so that's one project we're looking put together again, and probably then in 2 years from now, hopefully start that again. And it'll be pretty similar to our next one. And it's I mean, like I said, we're getting a lot of interest from landowners who want to participate in this work, and there's a lot of good information I think that the water quality world wants, but there's also some really good information that we can get out of this, that we can have for our operations, and it's data that we need, because we'd like in just future decisions really to be made off of this kind of data that in general we just don't have. It's a big black hole when you really are starting to look out on edge of field studies. If you go back east and you look in some of these Midwestern states, I mean, they've done hundreds and hundreds of these. I think we still don't even have one published study in Colorado of the work here. I think there's one that Manny's working on right now, but so there's a big data gap that we're working on. I think with that, I'm all done. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Are you aware of any studies like this that are going on for impacts from, say, lawns or golf courses?
I am not aware. The CSU team, they're doing, almost all of their sites are ag. They have one site that isn't, but it's in Grand County and it's post-fire recovery, but that's as different as it gets. So I'm not aware of anything else.
I don't know if you know of anything, again, just outside of the state, though, but I'm sure there are a ton.
What about MS4?
But not, yeah, not within the state that I'm aware of. Yeah. And I mean, that would not be a non-point source type of study, though.
Well, they're kind of edge of
Yeah.
golf course, edge of
Yeah.
parks, edge of lawns. I think you might want to check the Cherry Creek Basin Water Quality Authority website, or perhaps we could talk a little bit later. I mean, I know of some private companies that have done them, and I know that it's being shared with the stormwater permit holders, so that they can target the work that they do, the outreach that they do. So there may be something useful for you.
I think there was, yeah. No. So one site, they do alfalfa, and then when they rotate out the alfalfa, they do an oat mix. Two of the other sites, just grass hay mix. One of the site is a non-irrigated, and it's just pretty much like a sagebrush where cattle are on part of the year. Yeah. Yeah, and so we're keeping track of just how much cattle are on all of them, and just also when irrigation happens, how often, and the amount of nutrients. Yeah, yeah, and they're all pretty differently managed. One where cattle are on 3 months out of the year. One like most cow-calf operations, usually half the year, and then one most intensively, they're usually on each field twice a year, and yeah, they don't have any federal lands that they take their cattle to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, with these cow-calf operations, fertilizer practices are all over the place. Whether it's the amount, fall or spring, some areas it's non-existent, in some areas everybody does it. There's nothing really uniform, and there really hasn't been much done. And so far, it's like some of the results that we're already seeing, like the guy in Routt County who has probably the most intensive amount of cattle on the ranch. He also uses less fertilizer. Some of the results we're seeing just based off the soil samples are really good. I think that there might be some really interesting work just long term that we can get out of this in fertilizer applications. Yeah.
One more, and then we'll have to keep moving. Oh. Oh, okay. So Well, Greg, you may identify yourself as a baby farmer, but it sounds the kind of a child prodigy baby farmer, okay? Well, thank you all for your time and attention, and especially you guys, thank you all for sitting up here, and you haven't been able to check emails or texts or anything, so you so great. Now I would like to introduce Anna Moss, the Chief Operating Officer with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and she's going to bring it all back home here and talk about the Colorado Water Plan. Anna is a professional engineer with experience in the private sector, as well as her experience with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So thank you, Anna.
And for those who were in my workshop yesterday, I do not have a PowerPoint today to avoid any really embarrassing typos. So I'll just